Hey everybody, Eric here from TOURNA-MIX, the ultimate mix competition website. Hope you're doing well. Today we're looking at speed mixing a pop song. And before we get into it, I just want to clear something up. I think when people talk about speed mixing, some of you may associate that with, rushing or being stressed out or making mistakes, or, just in general having kind of an anxiety inducing experience like, I've got to move so quickly. No, that's not at all what I mean by speed mixing. When I talk about speed mixing, what I mean is moving efficiently, okay? It's more of like a Bruce Lee thing, conservation of motion, right? We're not moving in a frenetic way. We're moving intelligently. We're using, a template maybe if that helps you. We're using maybe less processing. Whatever it is, we're moving in a way that gets us to the finish line quickly, but in an efficient and effective manner. So what ended up happening to me this month is I chose to do this song for our July mix contest. This is a song called Demons, by the way, by Riley Spitzer, produced by Michaelito. But I decided to do it at the very last second. It was like, I think it was June 30th when I decided, hey, I'm going to do this song. So I had a day to mix it. And when I sat down, it was 95 tracks. And I thought, oh boy, I don't have any time to dwell here. I'm just going to get right into it. And I mixed it in about 2 hours. Then the next day I woke up and did a quick 15-minute revision and I was done. So I'm going to try to show you today, how I got to my mix in such a short amount of time. You can see here just visually, I didn't really do much. That was certainly the biggest secret or technique, is just not using too many plugins and not processing every track. All right. But I'm going to break it down for you and just sort of show you how I got to my mix. Real quick, because some of you haven't actually heard this song, I'm going to play from the beginning to the end of the first chorus. If you know the song, feel free to skip ahead. But here we go. Here's Demons by Riley Spitzer.
Poisonous seduction, you're headed for destruction. I like when you're suspicious, 'cause your fear smells delicious. We're playing hide and seek now, and I don't wanna slow down. I'll keep it nice and vicious. No secret, I'm malicious. On hands and knees you crawl, begging me to stop. Run too fast and you'll fall. Prepare to lose it all. I go crawling into the night, into the shadow where you're trying to hide. Try to see me, but I'm out of sight. I will get you, I will get you. Let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't exercise. Call the priest, but you'll never survive. I will get you, I'm the demon and I'm crucified.
All right, there we have it. I love that tune. Super catchy chorus. Let's take a look at some of my my mix moves. All right, we might as well start with the drums, which I have highlighted here. And you can see there's quite a few of them. These two plugins here, by the way, are just panning plugins. So I'm going to leave them on. They're not really plugins. They're just doing some panning for me. So here's the raw drums. Okay, no processing whatsoever. Right, they sound pretty good. I mean, pop drums tend to sound fairly mixed, even in their raw state. But they didn't sound totally ready, for release, in my opinion. They were just a little bit dull. Let me play those again, and I'll bring in my processing. Right, so you can hear a pretty big change there. Let me just turn all those back on. Let me run you through that. So the first plugin I brought in was Fresh Air by Slate. This is a fantastic plugin for a lot of applications, but if you haven't tried it on electronic drums, you really, really should. It's just such an easy way to get some more sparkle, going really, really quickly. You can see I've got the trim knob pulled back here to try to level compensate. So let me turn that off. Let's just bring in Fresh Air. such an easy way to make that, what is it, 30 tracks here of drums? There's a ton of drum tracks. Such an easy way to just get an immediate head start on your sound, okay? But it wasn't enough for me. Even with that, I thought, no, it still sounds a little dull, so I brought in Mag. I could have kept pushing Fresh Air, but I like this plugin too, and I thought I'd push up a bit of high shelf here starting at 2.5K and just a bit more subs. Let me bring that in. We'll start with it off. Right? Already we've got a huge lift. In fact, they already sound really, really good to me. So the next thing I did was I brought in some compression. And what that did for me was just kind of glue the drums together a bit, and it allowed the kick to sound a bit punchier. By setting the internal sidechain here at about 250 hertz, we're compressing everything above that frequency cutoff, and it really lets the kick punch through. Let's see if you can hear that again. Let me start with it off. Hear that? Just brings a little more thump to the kick and kind of glues the overall sound a bit. And finally, it's very important, when you have these kind of electronic drums that have those snaps and claps and really pokey bits, I think it's important to kind of hack down your peaks a bit. And you can use limiters or saturation or clippers. In this case, I use JST clip. So if I was to, let me actually turn it off for a second. Look at the peak value here on my drum bus. Right? We're up around, we're peaking. We're above zero, 1.5 above zero there. If I turn it back on, we don't get an enormous change in sound, although I do hear a little bit of that nice crunchy saturation, which I like. But we have a huge, amount of peak reduction. And when you go to, master your mix, even if it's not you, whoever does the mastering is going to have a far easier time if you keep those peaks in check. All right, so that's pretty much all I did. The only actual track that I processed in any way was the main kick. Okay, so the main kick, if I were to mute the EQ, sounded like this. In solo, I actually didn't even like the way that sounded. But with everything playing, I wanted to try to bring out a little more thump and a little more of that attack. So that was the only actual track that I processed. And quick note here, if you're wondering what this gain plugin is, this is just to invert the polarity of one of the kicks. Here's the three kicks together. And if I mute the gain plugin, get less low end. Right? So we always got to check the phase of our electronic kick components. It's not just live drums that you need to check that. All right, let's get back to the full drums here. There's just one more thing to show you. So here's where we're at, kind of. Whoops, not that guy, this guy here. But I've also got this running. All right, so this is just a very simple parallel compression auxiliary track. You can see this Send 7 here from my drum bus is sending a full copy of the entire drum kit, all the components over here, and I'm just hitting them hard. Right, and that's blended in. So here's back with everything playing. Now if I mute the parallel compressions, it's not a huge change, but it's less exciting. I just found it made the whole kit kind of come together a little bit. So that was all I did for drums. Now, it's also important to realize that so far I have my mix bus processing turned off, okay? If I turn it all back on, it sounds like this. Back off. All right, so there's also a ton of stuff happening on the mix bus. So I'm going through a compressor. which, just brings things together a little more. I'm going through some tape. This tape plugin adds a lot of high end to things. And then I also have let me just close those out, 3 more EQs happening. Okay, I've got hammer, I've got clariphonic, and I've got a Pultec going. So between these 3 EQs, they're adding a lot of shaping to the whole sound. I've got some mid-range being pushed up here, 1.2K with hammer, also 2.5K, and a huge big, this is a really big boost here with the lift from clariphonic. So these 2 EQs are adding a lot of mid-range, okay? This lift feature here is basically a high shelf at 800 hertz. So starting at 800 hertz and going all the way up to the top, we've got a big bump there. And then some more mid-range here, 3K bump here, just a small one with the Pultec, and a big low-end bump as well. So if I mute those 3 EQs, here's how it sounds. And back on. Okay, now I don't know about you, but now we have some drums that sound like they're ready to cut through a mix. And, it's all done on a bus level. We've got mix bus processing, and then we have, of course, all that drum bus processing, which I showed earlier here. So we've got 5 EQs, affecting, we've got these 2 as well, remember, the mag and the fresh air, all affecting the drums, right? And then the ones I showed over here, of course, on the mix bus are affecting the whole mix. But you can see there that rather than processing all these tracks, which would have been a nightmare, there's at least, 30 drum tracks here? It's a lot. I didn't solo up a single one. I just balanced them to taste and did heavy mix bus and drum bus processing. And I can honestly say that whole process took me less than 10 minutes, so I was moving real quick. All right, then I brought in the bass. Here's the raw bass with the drums. All right, so you can hear that I perked that mid-range up quite a bit. Most of that was coming from this synthy track here. We've got the main bass here, which is doing this, right? And all I did there was basically what's happening here is a little high pass at 50 hertz and then a dynamic cut, which is being triggered from the kick. Okay, that's a very common move in pop and all types of modern music. But the real sort of mid-range is coming from this synthy track here. That's raw. Right, you can hear, let me get rid of these plugins here. I don't know why I still have those going. So I've got Omega A here saturating the sound. I've got Hammer coming in and adding quite a bit of 2.5K. You can see that's a big boost there. All right, and then I'm just limiting the signal. So again, here's raw on that synth track. Here's Omega A. Here's Hammer. And then right? And just like that, I've got the foundation of the song. This was, done very quickly. We're given great tracks here. I mean, even everything completely raw was super. I mean, it already sounded great. It just needed a bit of enhancing. So, the main thing here was the big boost with Hammer. If I were to mute this EQ, listen to the bass. You can hear the sound really dies without that EQ. All right, so let's move on to the instruments. So these are the instruments. I've got them highlighted here. You can see there's almost nothing happening in the way of processing. I really felt the instruments were very background in this song. I've got a limiter here on one of the tracks. That's not even really going to change the sound. I've got looks like just pure gain, 4 dB of gain. Got a high pass running here on one track, but essentially I left the instruments 100%, raw. If I go over here to my all instruments track, I do have fresh air running. Okay, this is affecting every single instrument. So if I listen to those, I turn off fresh air. can hear things perk up a bit, but to be honest, there was so little mid-range in these instruments that there wasn't really a lot to push up. I ended up leaving that on, but it didn't really affect things too much. Let me just play the whole mix with the instruments going here. All right, now in this song, I really felt the vocals were, well, I mean, it's a pop song. Obviously, the vocals are important, but I just didn't really feel that the instruments needed a whole lot of work because the vocals filled in so much space. In fact, I'm going to mute the instruments for now. Let's just mute all of them for now and bring in the vocals. Maybe we'll come back to those instruments in a minute, although, again, I didn't really do anything to them. Let's bring in the vocals and see what happens. All right, so I've unmuted the vocals and I've taken off all the processing and effects. So here's like the final mixed drums and bass with the raw vocals.
You let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't exercise. Call the freak.
All right, so we can hear that obviously we're nowhere near a final pop sound. So when I heard those vocals, especially against the drums, which I'd already perked up, they just sounded really dark, right? Not a lot of mid-range, not a lot of high-end, which is normal for unmixed vocals. But I decided that it would be a lot faster to just perk them up on an auxiliary level. So this houses all of the vocals in the entire session, right? All vocals. And I brought in some plugins that I thought really helped, specifically the Mag and Fresh Air again. Okay, so let me bring in those two guys in. I'll start with them muted. Here's the vocals completely raw, and I'll bring in just those two plugins.
Get you. Let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't exercise. Call the priest, but you'll never survive. I will get you.
Holy cow, right? Like that's just ridiculous. I mean, with two plugins, this one doing quite a bit of heavy lifting, right? Fresh Air, crank the high end at 40. That's pretty high for Fresh Air. If you're familiar with this plugin, that's pretty high. And 20 on the mid-range, okay? And then a huge bump here at 2.5K. This is a high shelf on the Mag, okay? So pushing up everything above 2.5K. A bump at 650. Okay, cutting some mud at 160 here. And we already have a huge change. I think that's worth another listen. So here's raw again.
Get you. Let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't exercise.
I mean, that's like, feels like 90% of the heavy lifting. And that's with two plugins affecting every vocal. Okay, then for fun, I brought in some saturation. I really, really love Omega Tweak and Omega A. This is going to be a far, smaller change, but I thought it added some cool stuff. So here's raw, or without the saturation, and I'll bring them in.
Get you. Let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't exercise. Call the priest, but you'll never survive.
All right, so there we go. Let's hear that in context, fully mixed.
You. Let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't exercise. Call the priest, but you'll never survive. I will get you.
All right, so it's a big change, but in context, what I found, even though in solo it sounded like super mixed, in context we still had some work to do. So then, I went to the track level. All right, so even with all that heavy lifting, I still had to do some extra work, but a lot less of it, okay? Like if I had tried to tackle every single one of these vocals, you can see here, there's quite a few vocals in the track. If I'd tried to tackle every single one of them without that broad bus processing that I just showed you, it would have just been a lot more work. So I found that I was psychologically in a great headspace coming into this track processing because it already got them sounding quite a bit better. But you can see here, like if I were to solo up the chorus vocals for you.
You. Let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't.
We're not quite there yet. So if I bring in all the individual track processing on the main vocal there.
Get you.
There we go.
Let the pain and the fear paralyze, like a parasite you can't exercise. Call the priest, but you'll never survive.
That definitely did a lot too. Let's take a quick peek at that. All right, so this is like the main chorus vocal, and you can see that even with all that bus processing, I still had to cut out some low end, do some mid-range cleanup, and a pretty big bump here at whatever that is, at 4K. All right, and then I compressed it with Arvox, which is a great pop compressor. I added some grit with this guy here. You may have heard of it, Decapitator, on the E setting, which is definitely the brightest setting. All right, and then I added some more compression with AR1 and some more high end with the lift control here, or the tone control. So these vocals did require some big moves. Okay, so this sounds like this completely mixed.
You let the pain and the fear paralyze.
Right, and that's compared to this. If I mute everything,
You let the pain and the fear paralyze.
let's bring in the EQ.
Like a parasite you can't exercise.
That's the biggest move.
Call the priest, but you'll never survive. I will get you, I'm gonna get you. Let the pain and the fear paralyze.
It's with some grit.
Like a parasite you can't exercise.
More compression.
Call the priest, but you'll never survive.
And even having done all that, I still had to bring in a final EQ at the end of the chain here, which you can see it's kind of like a tilt EQ in a way. If I expand this out to more wider view here, right? I'm cutting, this is a low shelf at 400 hertz about, okay? So taking everything down, what is it here? 2 dB below 400 hertz, okay? I got a big bump here. Well, it looks big right now in this view, but it's only 2 dB. 2 dB at 4K, and then a bit, a kind of a big cut here at 1K. All right, so let me mute this EQ.
You let the pain and the fear paralyze.
You hear how it sounds kind of boxy?
You let the pain and the fear paralyze. Like a parasite you can't exercise.
Yeah, this cut here really takes away some of that 1K boxiness. Anyway, you can see here I definitely still had to do some work, but it came together really, really quickly with that initial bus processing. Let's hear that chorus again.
You let the pain and the fear paralyze. Like a parasite you can't exercise.
All right, now let's go back to the all vocals over here. Let me take away that initial processing and see how it sounds.
You let the pain and the fear paralyze. Like a parasite you can't exercise. Call the priest, but you'll never survive. I will get you.
Ouch. It just sounds so bad without this all vocals processing that I did. I mean, in my opinion, at least, it really, really dies. And, it's true that I did have to dig in over here on this main vocal track and do some work. I mean, this kind of work here was hardly, this was slower is my point. It took me a little more time to dial this stuff in. But with this shine that I put on everything over here, it just made it so much easier. Between that and my drum processing here, that's 8 plugins affecting like, half the mix, right? And then between those and the mix bus processing, when it came time to do this kind of stuff, it just was so much quicker. I mean, this looks like a lot of processing, but it's really not that much. The last one was just a de-esser here. So yeah, we're talking about speed mixing and, how to get the ball down the field as quick as you can. And I really, really think that when you focus on your balance and then your group tracks, you can just get so far so fast. All right, now we've been listening to the song for the last few minutes here without all of the instruments in. Let me just play it one more time without the instruments.
I go crawling into the night, into the shadow where you're trying to hide. Try to see me, but I'm out of sight.
Now, the reason I'm playing that for you is, I don't know about you, but it sounds pretty complete to a final mix or a final song, even without this, like, what is this, like 40 tracks of stuff? I guess they're not all playing during that section, but we got a lot of stuff going on here that is muted. And we already have something that sounds, I think, at least pretty good. So the reason I point that out is that imagine I'd spent tons of time on all these individual channels trying to make them all work when really we're already like 95% of our way to a song, right? So these channels here, if I bring them in,
I go crawling into the night, into the shadow where you're trying to hide.
they're really not offering that much to the song. In fact, that little melody that was just playing is kind of the main, it's like the main instrumental contribution in the whole song. The band was about to kick in a little more here. Let me move it ahead a bit. Okay. All right, so in that busy section, let me mute all the instruments again. Again, I think that sounds really close to a final song. Let's bring them in.
Let the pain and the fear paralyze. Like a parasite, you can't survive. I will get you. I'm a demon and I'm crucified.
Yeah, so those instruments add a nice little backdrop. They add a bit of harmonic content to contextualize the melody and all the rest of it, but they're not really contributing that much. And my point here is, like, imagine I'd spent 3 hours trying to process all that stuff, soloing up each channel, figuring out what it was doing. No, what I did is I actually kept all this stuff muted for about the first hour and a half of my mix, because I knew, again, that this
And the fear paralyze. Like
was what was really going to matter, okay? And when I brought all this stuff in, to be honest, I just kind of raised up all the faders and was like, man, that sounds pretty good. I added a little bit of EQ to some stuff. Most stuff I didn't touch. This again was just, this is just 4 dB of gain, so that doesn't even count. A little high pass here. But I didn't do much, and this is again in the spirit of mixing quickly. We want to try to keep our eye on what matters. And at this point in this song, all this instrumental stuff, as great as it is, it wasn't something I was going to spend a lot of time on, because I think we're kind of there.
let the pain and the fear paralyze. Like a parasite, you can't exercise. Call the priest, but you'll never survive.
All right, so there's my final mix. I hope I gave you, a few ideas for how you can move quickly here. If you're the kind of person that likes to solo up each drum track and process each one, that's fine. Be my guest. There's really nothing wrong with doing it that way. Personally, it's just not how my mind works, especially with this kind of production where all the tones are kind of there waiting for us. We just need to sort of spruce them up a little bit. So I found that hitting those buses hard, right, was the way to go. I mean, with 95 tracks, I didn't count here, but I'm guessing I'm at like 40 plugins total for the whole song, maybe less. So light on plugin instances, but heavy on plugin processing is what I did. So there you have it. Just a few insights on speed mixing and how you can move quickly, because it's to your advantage to move quickly. The longer you spend on a song, the less perspective you have, the less you're going to like the song. I absolutely hate that when you get to a point where you're just sick of the song you're working on. It's so frustrating. And for me, if I spend more than about 4 to 6 hours, that happens to me every time. I can't do 10-hour mixes anymore. I refuse to. If I am doing 10 hours, it's really small automation work, but it's not like big lifting. I like to try to get things going in about 2 hours, and then I usually spend about another 2 hours fine tuning. So I'm going to leave off there for today. I hope you guys got a few ideas for how to move quickly and save yourself a lot of frustration. Both of our contests are still open for July, so if any of you watching feel like joining the fun, just check out the link in the description below. It'll take you to our site and you can go from there. Be well. We'll talk soon.